I wanted to begin by clarifying the primary process here in America. Though there have often been independent candidates on numerous ballots in our short history, the United States is largely a dual-party system. The governments, local, state, and federal, are overwhelmingly allegiant to these two controlling parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. There are the national organizations for these parties, like the GOP and the DNC, and then the more localized versions of them in states and counties and cities, etc. These primary elections can simply be described as each state deciding who they want to run in the general election in November. However, because of our federalist system that the states operate and govern themselves within the Union, thanks to the brilliance of our founders, the primaries function differently depending on which state we're talking about. So, depending on the state, there is a mess of types of primaries one might participate in. Some sort of range between what we call open primaries and closed primaries. Let's talk about it. In a closed primary, only voters who are registered members of a specific political party can participate in that party's election. Currently, there are 8 states like this in the U.S. who hold closed primaries. They are Delaware, Florida, Kentucky, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Pennsylvania, and Wyoming. So in order to vote in these states, your registration has to reflect your party affiliation. For example, a registered Democrat in Florida cannot participate in the Republican primary for that state. On the other side, in an open primary, any registered voter, regardless of their political affiliation, can participate in the primary election and choose a party's candidate. There are 16 of these states in the U.S. Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Hawaii, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, and Wisconsin. In those 16 states, any person can vote for whomever they choose, regardless of their voter history or their party affiliation. Now, between those, there are 3 variant primary systems between open and closed. Partially closed, partially open, and open to affiliated. I'll explain. First, we have partially closed primaries. Here we have parties choosing, basically each election, whether to allow unaffiliated voters or voters that aren't registered with the given party to participate in their nominating contest, again, before each election cycle. So they could admit unaffiliated voters while still excluding members of opposing parties. That's why it's sort of open. This gives the parties more flexibility from year to year about which voters to include. And there's 8 of these states in the U.S. Connecticut, Idaho, Maryland, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, and West Virginia. Secondly, we have partially open primaries. In these primaries, registered affiliated voters can cross party lines, but they must publicly declare their choice. So a registered Democrat who, let's say, they're fed up with the sitting president, can effectively switch parties on primary day. And there are 5 of these states in the Union: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, New Jersey, and Ohio. And finally, third in this spectrum of primary systems, we have those that are open to unaffiliated voters. The only distinction between this system and just an open system is that registered party members cannot vote in the opposing party's primary, like a registered Democrat could not vote in the Republican primary, but those that are unaffiliated with a party, or they're not a registered party member, can vote in whatever primary they like. There are 8 of these states: Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. Now, if you're keeping count of all those, that's only 45 states, and that's because there are a few other primary processes. For example, California and Washington use the much debated top two format, where all the candidates, regardless of party, are listed on the same ballot, and then the top two vote getters head to the general election. In similar fashion, Louisiana does this top two format, yet they have a closed primary. Plus, their primary is a winner-take-all process. So all of the registered Republicans will get together this spring, and the majority winner will be rewarded all of their delegates, which I'll explain in just a moment. But in the general election this November, non-affiliated Louisiana voters will have their first vote in the process. And if none of the candidates garner more than half the votes, then the top two head to a runoff 6 weeks later. Nebraska also utilizes this top two system with a possible runoff, but they make the voting nonpartisan, meaning the candidates' parties and your political affiliations are irrelevant. But they're not even listed on the ballot, and this is in fact how things are here in Knoxville. And finally, you have Alaska with an entirely unique top four open primary. Now, again, this is how each state effectively declares who they want to run as their party's nominee for president. But these stately expressions are nationally voiced at the conventions, the RNC and the DNC, by individuals known as delegates. In similar fashion to congressional allotment, each state's number of delegates is based on their population. Now, in similar complexity to the primary voting systems, the delegation allocations differ from state to state. It may be proportional allotment, meaning the statewide vote determines a proportional delegation, as in the person who got the most votes gets the most delegates. Some states award by a threshold. For example, if a candidate gets 50% of the votes in a given state, then they are awarded all of the delegates for the national convention. However, there are some states that simply award all the delegates to whomever received the most votes. So whether it's a primary or a caucus being sort of like a miniature convention within the given states, the delegates are ultimately chosen to be as representative as possible for all the people of the state. After the primary or caucus, state parties decide who each of their delegates will be. These are those who will attend the party's national convention. And this is where the official nomination of the party's candidate for president takes place. For the Republicans, the RNC, over 2,400 delegates will gather in the middle of July to nominate the Republican candidate for the general election in November. The DNC will host nearly 4,000 delegates in late August who will decide who their nominee will be for the general election. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing the content, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you were meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug. Or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and, of course, the classic We the Free crest tee. We've even got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, that's right. So check out our new merch at wethefreeshow.com.